Good afternoon. Thank you for coming here promptly on time. It gives us that more time to have a discussion with my colleagues and with you in regards to mobile's technology to education. I hope what we can do for this session, even though there's glaring lights, so it's kind of hard to see, is that you could feel to be actively engaged in the conversation. These are all friends of mine, colleagues of mine, so we're going to keep it a little bit provocative, but I'd really like your own contributions as well, both to hear about the projects that you have or issues that you might want to build upon from our panelists here. I would just ask that you keep your comments short, and I will be playing a time clock in some way, just to make sure that we could do justice to all the questions and the opportunity to engage with you all. You had heard from me earlier this morning, but my name is Anthony Bloom. I'm the Senior Education Technology Specialist at USAID, and it's my great pleasure to welcome my colleagues today for this discussion about mobile technologies, both the optimisms and I think the challenges, right? So I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves, but let me just do a little bit of justice. To my immediate right is Rebecca Leach, who's Project Director of the All Children Reading Grand Challenge on behalf of World Vision. Rebecca, you can tell us more about your background at World Vision. Then next to her is Cecilia Markings, who's the Unit Chief for the Educational Portal of the Americas at the Organization of American States. And we were delighted to have OAS play host for this year's mEducation Alliance Symposium. How many of you have been to the OAS Hall of Americas? Anybody? That is a beautiful building. It was a great venue, so thank you, Cecilia. Yeah. And then to my far right is Mike Tricano, who's the Senior ICT and Education Policy Specialist at the World Bank. And Mike and I have had the good fortune to know each other for quite a number of years, so it's a pleasure to have you on the panel as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with just a few questions to the panelists, but please do raise your hand or otherwise let me know if you have a point that you'd like to make, either in support of or against a point that's being raised by our panels here today. So in the context of maybe providing just a little bit of background context to your role within your institutions, and specifically in regards to how it deals with technology. If I could ask each of you just to provide a little bit of background, and then we'll get into the mindset. So maybe we'll start with Rebecca.
Sure. So thank you, Tony, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Rebecca Leakey, as Tony mentioned, with World Vision. I'm their project director for our engagement in All Children Reading Grand Challenge. If you're unfamiliar with the All Children Reading Grand Challenge, it's a challenge focused on child literacy, improving child literacy in grades 1 to 3. The three partners, USAID's Office of Education, the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and World Vision. And we've been working on this for the last 2.5 years. We most recently launched one round about a year ago, focused on two specific ways of building in technology innovations in education, and that was looking at teaching and learning materials and increasing the quality and access of education data. So World Vision's engagement in this and the All Children Reading is really how can we bridge, even at the community level and with children, the new interventions related to technology and the education.
Thank you. We'll come back to specific examples.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon to all. My name is Cecilia Markings. I work at the Organization of American States. Specifically, I'm a specialist within the Department of Human Development, Education, and Employment. And I've been working in the organization for the last 10 years at the Educational Portal of the Americas, which basically is trying to offer all kind of opportunities, educational opportunities, to reach those that otherwise will not have access to education and training. So basically we started with a virtual education component, but since the last few years we are very happy to start exploring new ways of reaching our participants with a specifically approach of social inclusion and a strong commitment on community engagement. So those are basically two pillars that define our work all the time in the Americas.
Thanks, I'm Mike Tricano. I work at the World Bank, so right around the corner here. The World Bank, for those of you who don't know us, we are a multilateral development institution who work across all sectors. like USAID. In the education sector, we have ongoing dialogues at any time with between maybe 80 and 100 countries around the world, and increasingly these dialogues include questions, interests about technology, and I'm the fellow at the World Bank who helps our staff answer those questions, whether it's how you train teachers at a distance, or we're missing 600 or 60,000 teachers in our education system. Can we do something with technology to help cope? Or we want to buy a whole bunch of laptops. Do you think it's a good idea? Those kind of questions I help people unpack and think through.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so my first question I did mention we'll have a little bit of fun up here. And we're also inviting each other to disagree with each other as well, and I hope you'll join us. The first one is for you, Mike, because you had suggested provocative format. So Mike, when we talk about mobile technologies, I'd like to present one. This is a puppet that's through our Projector All Children Reading Grant Challenge that's helping in terms of video instruction and otherwise people learn. So this is another technology which is a micro projector, right? So you've seen these like small projectors before. So my question to you is, what's so exciting about a mobile phone when we already have really cool mobile technologies that you could use for delivering content in the classroom? Is there something that's common about these mobile technologies, or something unique about mobile phones that you'd like to highlight? And you can hold a copy if you'd like.
Yeah, and so even so I'd say mobile phone is a novelty pretty much everywhere around the world, still in education, even if most teachers and a lot of students have them in their purses or backpacks or pockets. Or whatever. I think what's interesting for me and for us is the fact that, well, let's say a country is going to invest and buy 600,000 laptops, put them into schools. At the same time, they've got a couple million of these riding around in their schools. We say, do you really need to invest all this money in hardware, or can you take advantage of existing investments that have already taken place and build off the top of them? Investments in technology that people have with them all the time, are personal, like this little guy or lady here, which are with people all the time. Oftentimes it's the last thing people touch before they go to bed and first thing they wake up, maybe not their spouse, but at least their phone will be with them. And when this thing is with them all the time, that means you have opportunities to connect and to learn in ways that you don't have when you were talking about other sorts of technology. And I think those are some interesting things. Also, when you put a lot of laptops or computers into schools, you need to do a lot of training, and there's no substitute for training, but people seem to know how to use these. And no matter where you go in the world, it seems, for better or for worse, you can buy Coca-Cola, and you can charge your cell phone. And there's a reason for that. It's because they fulfill needs, for better or for worse, that people have. And people seem to be able to keep these things working as well. And so much of a challenge of technology use in education is things break, or people can't really figure out how to use them, or even why they should use them. And they're already convinced in some ways about certain things they can do with these, even if they haven't equated that with how they might use them to learn.
Thank you, Mike. Mike, it sounds like you're really agog about the excitement of technology for mobile phones, and that's great. I really appreciate that as well. However, Cecilia, I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure Mike directly answered the question because he spent a lot of time talking about the technology, but what's the common feature with that mobile technology right there, the puppet, and with utilization of a mobile phone? Is there something that's a common feature?
I think that something that we are always very biased on is the educational approach, the human component. So we are always talking about technology and introducing new technologies, but we cannot forget that we always have that human touch that make a difference and that make the projects really sustainable. So that is something that we're really biased on, and it is really important, based on our experience, to start talking with people and with the user and with everybody that is going to participate in a project since the very beginning. Just not to give them a solution that was designed by someone else, but it was something that they were part of when they were thinking about how to improve the local environment. Yes.
Thank you, Cecilia. So Rebecca, a question to you as well in regards to our puppet or mobile phones. Can you speak in regards to local utilization? Sort of what design features would go into, for example, whether it's using a puppet or content from a mobile phone, how important that is in the communities where we work?
Great, yes. This is great. I wish we could hear it talk, Tony. Make it talk. What I find is really critical in the things that we've been looking at in All Children Reading is ensuring that messages, be it on a puppet or on the phone, are delivered in mother tongue. And there's probably not enough of that type of content already in existence. Making sure that regardless of where you are in a community and how rural or how low resource it is, that those individuals are able to learn and receive a message and hear a message in their local language, not necessarily the language of instruction. So I feel like as we have great potential in these devices, but it also needs to be balanced in, especially for younger children, how they can learn and how they learn best. And recognizing as Cecilia brought up, meeting with the community and understanding what they would like. Also understanding what are the barriers, what are the challenges they are going to face in maintaining the usage and the application of some of these devices.
Thank you, Rebecca. Was there anyone in the audience who would like to provide another example of sort of effective uses of technology or to build upon some of the themes that we've discussed here? This will be a truly participatory session. If somebody would like to contribute maybe a project they're familiar with or another example to reinforce the points raised by our colleagues.
Or a challenge that you
Or
are
a
already
challenge.
facing. We are facing challenges all the time, so
Too early in the session?
I get it.
Yeah? Please. And if you could say your name and your organization, that'd be great.
Hi, Tommy Grant, State Department. We are,
What if the EdTech conference with that IQ
Tommy Grant, State Department. We are talking about mobile technology as if it is not connected with the fact that you can bring it anywhere. You can bring it in a classroom. I don't know if you have found that trying to do it in a classroom is better than trying to do it at home. But recently, Comcast, another brand, introduced the low affordability of the internet to the DC area. Why? Because people were using the devices, say in the library or the car, they had to plug it in to keep it going. And parents would be out late at night with their students trying to get homework done. Homework is being pushed out through the internet. But just something like getting a corporation like Comcast interested in providing low-cost internet meant, and also the hardware at low cost, meant that students could use their technology where they live, which means it increased efficiencies for them. They could get more homework done. There was less anxiety of having to leave a place late at night or to try to figure out how to get there if their parents work. That is an example of how that's used here, and I'm sure if we're talking worldwide, it would be also a good example of that public-private partnership.
That's a great point, Tommy. Before I turn it back over to our panelists to talk about public-private sector partners, and I think there are some exciting examples. Anybody want to pick up that point that Tommy had raised in regards to public-private sector? Perhaps you have an example of your own that you'd like to highlight in regards to. Please, if you can, I'm going to keep you busy, I see.
My name is Suhair Ghali, and I just came from Egypt. I closed a 6-year USAID-funded project. The name of the project is Stylo, Technology for Improving Learning Outcomes. And the objective of the project was to integrate technology in education. We had a very big component in this project, which is the PPP. We succeeded actually to bring $9 million to the project from Intel, from Microsoft, from Discovery Channel. And it's very important to introduce the PPP to any project because they add to the value of the project. Inside our school, we had lab activities. We had Intel inside the classroom. We had video from Discovery Channel. We had laptop from IBM. So this makes the technology more effective. What I will need to highlight here, the importance of training. We are not saying we are introducing technology, we are introducing education by a way where technology is effective. So training is very important. It's the base of introducing technology. The problem in Egypt and in other countries that the ministry doesn't do the link, that technology is just a tool. If you don't have the good curriculum, if you don't have the good training, you are not going to have an effective use of technology.
Thank you, Sorelli, for that example of useful collaborations, but then raising an important point about technology training. Let me turn it back over to the panel just to pick up on the private sector partnership, and we will come back to the teacher training. Can I ask perhaps my panelists to highlight maybe an example of a private sector partnership in education that they might like to draw some attention to, or the converse, which is make it anonymous in terms of relationship building with the private sector that has challenges. So let me start with Cecilia, if you one that you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I think that what I wanted to add regarding, I think partnership is a key point when we are talking about use of mobiles for education. For us is the space to go is with partners. I would like to add to what you just mentioned about public-private is the importance of including different stakeholders. You have private sector, you have public sector, you have NGOs, and then you have multilateral organizations. So putting all those partners together, it can be really challenging, but I think it's really worth the effort, because otherwise we are all doing specific activities that are not connected. And that makes the implementation of the project really difficult. So if we want the project to move forward and pass a 2 years implementation cycle, we need to work with the partners. And I want to pick also on something that you mentioned, which is the relevance of how we are creating, or if we are creating, new learning environments using mobile devices, and how is that relevant to the curriculum? That is really a strong point that we have to really be aware of, absolutely.
Thanks, Cecilia. Mike, do you have an example of you frequently come out with your 10 lessons learned, which you have a multitude in regards to private sector engagement. Is there a specific highlight or detraction that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I think, so building on your comments, ma'am, I mean, this is the only way to go in places around the world where governments see that they either don't have enough money to introduce technology, or they don't feel they have enough know-how to do it, or they feel they need to crowd in other perspectives. I mean, this is what happens. It's not easy, though. It's not easy to start these things. It's not easy to keep them working. It's not easy to figure out if they're working, and it's not easy to get out of them. And I think although there are challenges in all these areas, one challenge I know for government and folks we talk about is there's certainly in the education sector. In other sectors, there's a longer history of public-private partnerships, variously defined. But there's a skepticism about why these groups are partnering with us. What's the end goal? Is this a corporate social responsibility initiative that's all about the child or the learner? Is this really business development by other means or under other guises? And there's nothing wrong with business development under other guises. But if whoever's sort of running the show, and where the Ministry of Education is running the show, they need to be strong in figuring out how they can meet their objectives and not be led. And at the same time, I think one of the challenges for a lot of private sector groups and civil society, perhaps to a lesser extent, but especially for private sector partners, is figuring out actually how to work with government and what actual government goals are and how those can be aligned with what private sector goals might be.
Thanks, Mike. Rebecca, do you have an example from all children reading?
From All Children Reading, we have actually a new engagement on the private side, and that is with Orange Mobile in France, where they are offering research and development time to some of our projects, helping them with some of their business models, and then potential linkages with their own mobile platforms in countries around the world. And also to build off the part, your comment on the linking it between the curriculum, the teachers, it is wonderful to see a classroom full of different technology devices, but we must continually remember that the teacher, especially if they aren't and have not been trained effectively, will not use those devices. Sometimes the students will surpass them, and it leads to low confidence on the teacher's part, so that they don't have the engagement and the confidence to effectively teach, especially reading. From an all children reading perspective, we're looking at, are they effectively teaching reading at that early grade using a device and allowing that student to learn from their own separate device?
Tony, may I riff off that really quickly? So, and I know all four of us up here are familiar with this statement that a lot of times teachers, when they hear that lots of new technology is coming into their school, they're excited. Once they hear it's coming to their classroom, they're delighted. And once it comes into the hand of all the students, they're terrified, because they're not sure how to work in this new environment with these new modalities, especially some of the teachers who aren't the strongest perhaps, or particularly where there aren't good systems in place to help them and support them over time. Tommy, you mentioned about this issue of portability. I think so. This is one of the reasons why we see oftentimes mobile devices, whether we're talking about phones or other things, really relevant outside the classroom, even outside the school, for learning opportunities that might be informal or linked to formal programs. There's a sort of an old, it's a canard that says that technology is revolutionizing education everywhere but inside the classroom, something that EdTech people said for about 10 years. But it's certainly true in the case of use of small devices. We have, about 2 years ago, we looked at education systems around the world, and we had 56 that had banned phones in schools. So if that's the case, this isn't a relevant device in those places right now. And once you ban them, it's much tougher to go back and unban something than when that isn't in place in the first place. So we have a question.
So please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Maura, and I'm a web consultant, also a parent of a high school student. I've seen what you're talking about, that cell phones can be banned in high schools, and in fact, my child's schools, they were completely banned in middle school, and then the very next year, completely allowed in high school. And the teachers are nervous about them, so now they have very specific rules that they can't be used during class time. And the teachers aren't really using mobile phones very well for education. I wonder if you've seen good ways to market the use of cell phones for education. If you say, well, let's tell the teachers that your favorite sports star says, look up this website and I'll teach you a language, or any kind of campaigns that can help these seem friendly to teachers and interesting to students.
Great. Can I invite, perhaps before we turn it back, that's a great question. Are there any examples from folks in the room who would like to share their own examples of mobile integration in the classroom that is not threatening? Kind of hard to see. Please.
Sorry, David Thiesinga, Einstein Fellow. I teach 8th grade and 9th grade, physics, earth science, engineering, the whole bit. And now over at NSF for a year. Using mobile phones in the classroom is difficult because you have to monitor them. But if they're integrated with the curriculum, it can actually work really well. We were doing hurricanes, and the easiest way to get the information, because we were working with foreign countries as well as our own NOAA, was to communicate directly with those individuals in those foreign countries, as well as the actual scientists. They're all tweeting. The students, if they don't have a tweet account, they actually use the school's account. And they can begin to communicate with them and actually see live what actually is going on there beyond the news. And their device turns into something more than just a phone or a way to actually use their Facebook. And one of the reasons why it is a distraction, and it is a distraction, I mean, no teacher is going to say it's not, is because they don't know what else to do with it. It's got a whole bunch of apps on it. Take a look at your son and daughter's phone. I mean, they're all just, it's just a whole bunch of junk on there. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of really good things on there, but I also know a whole bunch of great apps that are great right now. I mean, I could put an app on your phone right now that's a seismogram, and it can sit on the floor right now, and I can tell you when there's an earthquake happening. I can tell you when a big bus just went by. And we can talk about how those things are moving, and we can talk about how your actual phone is actually working on these sorts of things. There's a SatCam application, which I use all the time for observing the sky. It'll tell you when the latest satellite's going overhead. There's one that's going by in 10 minutes, 120 kilometers away from you. And you can go outside right now, point it up to the sky, point it at the horizon. It'll take that data, and it'll give to your phone the image that you just took, but from space, back down at you. Those are all really interesting things, and they're only interesting, but they're powerful if you integrate with the curriculum. And at the moment, I don't think we're integrating with the curriculum. We have a lot of one-offs and a lot of fun things. We need to integrate with them with the curriculum.
Hey, your first name was David?
David.
David, thank you, David. So how many of you know about Minecraft? Minecraft, one of your parents? Is it amazing how many kids are using Minecraft? But there are Minecraft clubs at school, which is really interesting. It's also, how many know that song is, what sound does a fox make? What's that song? You think about these applications that young people are attracted to. David, to pick up your point in regards to how do you integrate it. So let me turn it back to you and ask a question of yourself and others in the audience. So if we're talking about integration of technology in a traditional classroom setting, perhaps there's a formal structure, but what happens if you were to take that traditional model and take it outside the classroom? We heard earlier about a flipped classroom environment. Would you perhaps have an example, or others here, about experiences where teachers are taking advantage of maybe young people's passion for use of technology to deepen the learning experience, although they may not know it, because it's an after-school activity or otherwise? Does anybody have any examples they'd like to share? Please.
Well, mine is a little bit, I don't have a mic.
And what's your name, sir?
Nelson with the Help Her Foundation.
Okay.
We had been working on a project outside, something we call the Cloud Workforce Project. And what we have found from those of us outside the education side, that like we need these kids to come out who can work, quote unquote, on the cloud. And some of us had been developing curriculum for it, but when you then showed up to the established, education systems or workforce training, and it's not an idea that comes from them, surprise, surprise, they don't like that idea. So, Twitter is one thing, the cloud is a much bigger thing, and so then it becomes much scarier to the systems that are today. And as a matter of fact, the cloud is as disruptive to their systems as anything they've ever faced, so they're really nervous about embracing it. But we need these kids for, if they're going to work in a nonprofit or they're going to work in a business, they are going to have to learn how to be part of the cloud workforce. So it's going to have to be embracing from the outside as well, because maybe the educators who are on it today, they don't have that experience.
Well, there is obviously a generation set in
Yes.
regards to their facility with the use of a variety of technology platforms. Great point. Calling him back, was it Jim?
Yeah.
Jim with Perkins International.
Hi, I'm with Perkins School for Blind. It's interesting. And not to sound like, but it's kind of a generational thing sometimes, I think, because I think those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s don't even understand some of the technology that our kids are embracing these days, because it's changing so rapidly, and our kids are really embracing it. So sometimes what we think see as junk and is it's really not useful and whatever, it's providing education in kind of a different way. And it's not with the old textbook way that we think of providing education, or different ways, but different types of education, different types of communication that we really have a hard time, those of us who are over the age of 30 or whatever, have a hard time wrapping our head around. And so we kind of just have to look at it as, what did the teacher, when we were in school, we were kind of doing things that some of our teachers said, well, what's the point of that? Which we found the use for it. There was a reason to do it. Some of the things we use, for example, Twitter. It's great that they're communicating with scientists, and it's great that they're communicating with, different other people, but just communicating with their friends, or finding other people across the world, around the world, and communicating on some of these game sites. We have at Perkins, we have 2 classes, and then we have a break time. And I often think the kids learn more during the break time, because that's when they're learning from their friends. The one's will learn something in one of the classes and will take it to his friends, and his friends like, yeah, I already knew that, but can you do this, this, and this? You can do this. And so our kids actually learn more sometimes during that social time, which is it's tough for us to embrace.
Jim, terrific. In terms of embracing, because it's a flow that's coming, how do we take advantage of the passion and excitement? Mike, I think you wanted to build upon that, and Cecilia. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, so that, there was some research done a couple years ago in Texas where they were looking at use of phones, and whether it's a phone or a tablet or whatever. And one of the questions that the researchers had was about screen size, and was it too small? And this really interested, the researchers in their 50s. And they were a bit perplexed by some of the responses they were getting, because they said, well, it is what it is. This is the screen size. And I think this highlights the fact that a lot of times when people are looking at something new, they think about, or they talk about, or they consider what it can't do. And there are all sorts of things that this form factor, I think, enables you to do. I mean, it talks to you. Other people talk to you through it. It talks to you based on things like Siri. It's with you all the time. Small screen size isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I think one of the challenges, I think, for us as we try to conceptualize the use of new tools that don't conform to how things used to be is to flip around whenever we talk about something that it can't do and think about, conversely, there is something that it does do. I remember there's research and highlighting when television came and whether television is a good or bad educational tool over time, and of course it all depends, but people bemoaning the fact that you go to a movie theater and there's this huge screen, and how can you shrink that down into something you have in your, it's just not the same. Whether or not it's a good thing that you can flip channels with your TV, we maybe in 2013, we think that's maybe not the greatest thing, people just flipping channels, but I mean, that's something you can't do in a movie theater. And there are all sorts of things that you can do with these different things. And I think focusing on what we can do as opposed to what we can't do may get us somewhere a little more quickly.
Thanks, Mike. Cecilia?
Yeah, just a few comments. And maybe to think it differently. When we work in our countries in the Americas, electricity and connectivity is still an issue.
Yeah.
So maybe a different way to think how we can integrate technology with an educational point of view in our curriculum, it would be how the context can challenge that integration, because for our citizens in the Americas, maybe using a cell phone or a device like that is their way to be connected and to have access to information and to have access to education. So if you cut that, they are still isolated again. And we know that introducing technology in education is all about a different skill, which is sharing. And sharing because we are learning with others. And that is part of the new construction that we do. So maybe the question is still how we are changing the way that we are working with our students. If we are still using the old model with different technologies, but we keep using the old model. So that would be maybe another question that we can think about, because absolutely we don't have the answers.
Thank you, Cecilia. Well, that raised a lot of points. Excellent. Well, let's start with this lady here. We'll go to this gentleman and then Nelson.
Sorry, I'm not actually responding directly to your point. My name is Jessica Deere, and we do a lot of informal training. So I would like to challenge you guys, and everyone here actually, to remember that there are other contexts for using mobiles for education, and that we're not all in a traditional, for lack of a better word, classroom.
Yeah.
I see the most potential for mobile learning with adult learners, and for skills-oriented learning, for job training, for mobile learning that people can do, commuting, this sort of thing. And I would really love to hear some of those stories, as well as some, maybe a bit deeper discussion into developing content for a mobile environment. So just as an example, we're building a platform now and trying to think about different ways of converting what we've designed for the web to a mobile environment, including being able to download it, as well as using feature phones rather than smartphones. This is something that I didn't know really was possible, but it's being proposed to us now in a partnership that we're engaging, that we're doing with UNICEF Innovation. And I would just love, I'm trying to educate myself a little bit more, so if there's an opportunity to sort of expand the discussion beyond classroom, I would appreciate it. I would love it. Thank you.
That sounds great. Now, let's see. There were people that have raised their hands. That's a good question. Was this in response to Jessica's question or the previous question? I think we had this gentleman over here in the pink shirt first, and then Nelson, then we'll come back.
Hi, I'm Chris Kagi with Devis. I want to both respond to your question and respond to you. Yes, I'm an ASTD master trainer. I've done the adult education thing. Absolutely. Phones that we walk around with here have an awful lot of potential for, even if you simply just stick to just-in-time delivery of information, absolutely. If you go so far as to augmented reality and marry the camera on the back of this thing with the world out in front and what you can superimpose. There's an app that someone showed me called Sunseeker that photographers use, that you fire up the camera on this thing, point it at the horizon, and it shows you in hour increments where the sun is going to be and where the shadows are going to be, so they can do. So again, job aids, absolutely there. Back to the panel, you're talking about every time, sir, you picked up and you were saying this device, you're holding a smartphone. Most of the rest of the world, in a lot of the developing world in particular, use feature phones. So we have a completely different paradigm to deal with there. And that, you don't get cluttered apps on the feature phone. You can make a phone call, you can send an SMS. The trick of using that to enable education seems to be a much stronger, much higher barrier.
Was it Jim? What was your name?
Chris.
Chris, just to, I know we had some other points, just to build upon that one point for a moment is, so this is a 1 gigabyte flash drive, right? How many 200-page books do you think you can include on a 1 gigabyte flash drive? Any guesses?
100.
200? Do I hear 3? You can fit 4,400 200-page books on a 1 gigabyte flash drive. If I take this Pico projector into a classroom, then you can preload content on it, right? I can connect it to my mobile phone, but I really guess the question is, why mobile phone? I mean, if you have a variety of media platforms, at the mEducation Alliance, we had a discussion about if you had one mobile technology per classroom in a developing country, which technology would that be? So I think it's an excellent point in regards to the types of technologies that are available now, as opposed to, there was a little sidetrack, but thank you for that opportunity, Chris. So I know that there was a few, please? Yeah.
Hi, Ginny Woolley. Maybe hold it closer. Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out which way to go. I think I'd like to go in this direction, which is cross ages. What I'm wondering is who is doing the research and the collection of the design, whether it's online learning at the university level. There's a little bit of movement away from the talking head and including some graphics and stuff, and at the kindergarten level, there's the kind of the gaming sort of thing. But in the middle, what is effective? What does it look like when there's effective online learning for either in the middle or adults at home or whatever? That's not the lecture. That's not the university course. And how do we go from saying we have such and such a course and we want to turn it into an online course, and it doesn't just go from one to the other? And this is something that there's a great deal of difficulty with developing countries and with development groups and with funding people who don't understand why you can't just take it and transfer the written stuff into what you read online. And in continuum, how do we know about the methodology of then going to something like the mobile phone when you don't have youngsters working on it who don't care so much about screen size, and sometimes and websites don't always, online learning doesn't always transfer to something this small? I'm just wondering, where is the development going on for the methodology for what's effective teaching and learning online?
It's a terrific question, and I think it's not just in regards, if I take your point to mobile phones, it's effective utilization of technology. If I hear your larger point in regards to design and development of quality content. I know there was a few hands, but let me turn it back to Cecilia and then Mike to give their own reflections.
Okay. No, I agree absolutely with your point, and actually you remind me that I'm not alone sometimes when I'm talking because I've been working in distance education since printed materials 20-something years ago. Yeah, that's terrible. And it is hard sometimes for people to understand what you just mentioned. It's not just using the same format, the same text that you're using and upload it into a website and then you have an online course. Because it's the same way that if you have an event like this, you prepare yourself in a specific way. No matter the same topic, if you have to write a paper, it's a different one. If you have to write a book, it's a different one. It happens the same when you are adapting how you develop contents for different devices, methodologies that you're using to reach people and get them trained. So that is a huge point. I don't think that we still have enough research and proven data that can let us know which is really the difference that we are making, what solutions are we bringing on the table. But it's something that you have to be aware of, but since the very beginning, because sometimes when people talk about research, they talk about the data that they want to collect after the project was implemented, and not since the very beginning, as part of your designing methodology. So it's something that's really important that you put on the table, and we are keep discussing the topic all the time. But also, it shows that there's no one specific solution that fits all. And you were talking about how you can implement this in different environments. You can have future phones for networking, for supporting groups, for example, for health things in our countries. They're using text messages. We have some projects that we're aware of where you're working in a specific environment where people have no electricity. What are you using? You're using a hub where you have uploaded all your contents. That hub is charged by solar panels, and then people can access that hub through their mobile devices that they already have. So there are different kind of options, and you have to be very aware of the contents just to provide that a solution that is really effective for that local place. So that's something really
Chime in there to Cecilia, and
Yeah,
in
sure.
fact, I completely agree. And just to reiterate again, that it needs to be in a language that they can understand and can be easily translated or contextualized even for early learners. We've seen a number of, and all the children reading, a number of great initiatives where they are doing, back to I think Jessica's point, supplemental activities using feature phone, just simple messages and so forth, so that those lessons that were at the school can be linked to parents. Parents are then becoming more and more engaged in the whole education process of children, which is critical for their even next step. So to your point, just to be reminded that we need to continually ensure that it is in a language.
But also, for what purpose are we using these mobile devices? I think that the huge advantage is collaboration, because it put us all together. So I don't know if it doesn't make sense to put small screens of textbooks in these devices. We can use it, but it's the first use that we want to do for mobile devices. So we have to define a strategy that maybe is combining a lot of things. That's what we have kind of put it on the table, I guess, today.
So, and I would absolutely want to put books in these things. I know two things that people raise that get my heart racing a little bit when I hear them. So, a couple years ago, 3 years ago, people were fond of quoting the fact that more people had access, it's an unfortunate data point, more people have access to a mobile phone in the world than they do to a clean toilet. And so, and it's true, for what it's worth. And people then say, there's this huge universe and population of mobile phones out there, and then they develop smartphone applications for them. The places where we work, at World Bank, middle and low-income countries, developing for feature phones is what you develop for. And you can do things, you can skin feature phones in a way that give a smartphone-y type of experience in some ways that you can do a lot with. And for people who aren't used to a smartphone environment, it is an incredibly rich experience, even for people who are. So I think this is one issue about and so I totally agree with you, ma'am, about I think the greatest potential, certainly immediately and perhaps in the long term, is for outside of formal classroom type environments, on-the-job training, whether it means on-the-job, just-in-time support or access to information. There's huge opportunities there. One thing that because I meet with a lot of companies and they say, what should we develop for, country X or population Y? So we've got all this stuff. We've got monies we've already invested. How can we convert our content? And I say, don't convert your content at all. Start from this. Start from this form factor. Live in this form factor. If you want it to work on this, you've got to live and breathe it. Trying to adapt other things to here, you're going to fail. Maybe working in these environments, maybe not. One of there's a joke about Seinfeld couldn't exist in 2013 in the U.S. because all the developers in Silicon Valley and Helsinki have solved most of the Seinfeld problems because you can solve them with your phone, things you can do with your phone. Now, where the most interesting research and development is occurring, I think with mobile devices, is like out of the iHealth in Kenya, is in places in Botswana, in South Africa, in China, where people are approaching this as their first device. They've grown up, and this is how this is the way they mediate reality as far as education, and they're developing for that first, and oftentimes developing for it only. Not even thinking about the web, not even thinking about other stuff, because it forces a different type of discipline and perspective on what you can do and what's possible.
So I'd like to pick up on Mike and your point, and Rebecca. Rebecca, I heard you talk about the importance of mother tongue or local language. Cecilia, you picked up that as well. Mike, and you've just talked about the importance of applications being designed for feature phones or the context in a lot of developing countries. How do you pair those together? Because if your access to your technology, one of the explicit reasons is that you can access content externally, bring that into a classroom, yet much of the language, a lot of the resources out there aren't in local languages or mother tongue. Does anybody have any suggestions about projects that are trying to marriage, to create sort of linkages between the promise of being able to use your technology to access external content, but the reality of, especially for early grade learners, needing to be instructed in a mother or local language? Anybody have any examples?
Part of a group that came out of the State Department was Crisis Commons, and we worked on Haiti. And a great example of that was that there was no Creole dictionary or anything. And the promise of the collaborative environment today was, within 48 hours, probably one of the best Creole online apps was put together and starting to be utilized. And we are seeing that, and it's, as someone who's been involved in both Crisis Commons and a group called Random Hacks of Kindness, who does a lot in developing countries, we are seeing these programmers who are solving problems, talking to us on this side, but they're then making it work on an SMS platform or something like that. So I think part of it is you have to have the vision of where you're going, and then when you're talking with people who are bootstrapping it, I mean, we all know in programming that the best programmers are the ones who have the least resources because they become the most insightful of how to exploit for what it's worth. So we are seeing it in the collaborative environment, and again, but though it's coming from people outside of the traditional institutions who are saying, hey, we can all put this together, and if you're willing to work with us, we'll just give you the code. And that's a whole different kind of environment in how we have assembled and structured educational environment. It's a little bit of a factory in itself too. So to have these crisis responders or digital enablers just showing up out of the blue is a little disconcerting, but they're getting good enough at it in the results. But again, we needed that Creole dictionary very fast in Haiti, or there was going to be even more problems than the obvious problems. And it did work, so we do see it.
Great, excellent. Please, Miss.
Peggy Siegel, Education Free Agent. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking before lunch during the Ignite session, where James Sanders said, quote, students group by their manufacturing date of when they were born. And what he wanted to do was create moonshots that eliminated grades, grade levels, and break down school walls. So this kind of puts I think the solution piece to his vision of change. And I'm wondering, as people are working solutions from a startup in developing countries, where they don't have grades, grade levels, and buildings as we know them in this country, are there ways to capture what we're learning that we can jump above in an innovative way some of the structures we have in place that we take for granted that defines education and moves more toward just-in-time learning over a lifetime for the globe? And was just wondering if you see any connections to what he said before, and then secondly, if so, how we might proceed to develop proofs of concept to make education different in people's minds across the generations, so we can really move ahead more in accelerated learning. Thank you.
Great point. I could think of two quick examples, but then invite my colleagues. And partly what I heard was to break the traditional model of teaching kids for specific grades. Two examples I can think of. One is Pratham. I don't know if you're familiar with Pratham. It's a large Indian NGO that focuses on literacy. They take a portion of the day that they're working with communities to group kids by reading level, not necessarily by age. So it makes a lot of sense in regards to the skills that you have. why not break that model, especially if you have kids that are being left behind? The second of which, in Indonesia, the Suparna Foundation, do you remember the one-room schoolhouses? So it's a similar model of looking at multi-grade instruction to again sort of compensate for or to build upon age level or skill level as opposed to necessary. Now I think that's partly in response to what I had heard. And how might you use technology? It then gets to more deliberate instruction focused at those different skill sets.
I would just add on to what you were saying, Tony. I think libraries remain a critical element, especially at the community level. With All Children Reading, we have Lubuto Library Project. There's representation here today, but they're focused, bringing cross-generation into a library, particularly focused on youth, though, and youth that are in school and out of school. And it's not only giving them the opportunity to do lessons on a computer or on their phone, but it's also then having, the soft space for younger kids to come. It's teaching the youth how to actually repair and have some technology skills, creating new applications, new lessons even for the younger children. So I think that's a really good model. There's also, the library system itself, the device, let's say, that an EU library that allows a huge amount of information to go out into the most rural areas. Open Learning Exchange, I think Richard Grove was in another panel. He is really a pioneer in allowing that level of information to reach a community, usually housed within a community center or a school, to have resources. But your point earlier about the Creole online dictionary, I think that's really interesting. There's a huge market potential in many of these countries to develop the local publishing, not in its traditional form, but in a non-traditional manner, and working with them to get their stories. We have different projects that are working on creating mother tongue books, children creating their own stories. We'd love to see that here in the developed world, so to speak. Can we not start to include some of those, share those across countries, etc.? So I think to earlier point about linking the resources and the technology, that remains untapped in many countries, especially in local languages.
And I think what you just mentioned about where the content are created, I think it's a key point, because some of the things that we are changing using mobile devices is that where the content is created at the level of the community. And also, you pointed out the importance of libraries, which I really agree, because it's coming up again with the community environment as part of the day-to-day basis activities that people are doing in the daily job. So that's important.
Thanks, Cecilia. If I could just pivot for one moment. I see that there's a question in back. Let's take that to build upon, and then I want to shift it slightly. Sir, in the back.
Mark Viola, the Vitruvian Project. I've got to say that this is an interesting dialogue, because you talk about both generations and different languages. Do you envision the way English has become the de facto language of computers? Do you envision an e-tongue developing, perhaps pushed not from English, but from someplace else, that the rest of us are going to have to learn?
Well, let me turn that back. It's a really provocative question. Any feedback from the audience about e-tongue? And is there a little TM next to it, or is it still open for people? So anybody want to respond to that in regards to the lingua franca of the web? Okay, please.
Won't it be Chinese?
Hi, I'm Nantina from Tech Change. I actually have a little bit of experience with that. I worked in Vietnam at a tech company that does social media and online gaming. And what I found fascinating about the user experience of very, very very young tech-savvy population in Vietnam in particular is that emoticons is a universal thing, not just in Vietnam, but really across Asia. And actually, if you don't have emoticons, it's almost considered passive-aggressive. Not to punctuate sentences with a smiley face or some type of emotional reaction. So I would say if there was if body language is fairly universal, I think emoticons is the closest thing we can get to a universal digital language. But even then, there's online Vietnamese emoticon dictionaries that I've seen, where like an extra parentheses can mean like, extra severity like in a reaction.
Great example. And I know Tech James, you've been doing terrific courses in regards to mobile applications for development as well.
Yeah, actually, we've done a few courses specifically dealing with mobiles and across international development, and we have one coming up on mHealth. And to speak to an earlier point about how are mobile devices being used for specifically professional education, a few examples that come to mind to me is the MAMA program, the Maternal Alliance for Mobile Alliance for Maternal Action, where new mothers will get text messages for reminders on things on breastfeeding tips or other healthcare issues like that. And at the recent mobiles conference that happened here at the end of September, there was a social entrepreneur from Kenya, based in Nairobi, that is doing. She has a company that does SMS messages for primary school education, specifically in literacy and math. So it's purely text messages, but it's fascinating to see how that's actually been working with the kids that she's been working with. I think the name that starts Enzo, it starts with an E.
Sure. Great example. Don't let my son know, my younger son in particular, know that there's an emoticon dictionary. Because he likes to fill like his emails with lots of emoticons. So, and then his friends send it to each other, and then it's a full. Anyway. Okay, so maybe just to take this out, because I know there's a number of other topics, and I've really appreciated your engaged in the dialogue as well. I want to turn to my panelists and just see if they have maybe a closing thought in regards to, I was going to be provocative and say, if you were working with a minister of education or at a community level, right? And they said they're really excited about doing a one-in-one project in their schools. What are you really thinking, Mike?
Yeah, and just because it's just such an awesome question. I mean, you know, the e-language, I mean, it might be images. I mean, the way people communicate with images now, we get it, or music might be gaming as well. I mean, the international language of gaming, if we call it a language, the way young people interact with each other in connected ways, there are a lot of interesting things there. So I'm in that situation a lot where some minister or president says, hey, we want to buy everybody laptops. And so our default way of responding to that is, okay, that's really interesting. Let's think about how you can do that as a way to get at some of the underlying reasons why they might be doing it. Because as we all know, just dumping technology, I mean, we do a lot of work into Project Failure at the World Bank, surprise, surprise. And you know, dumping technology into schools or in any environment is a sure route for failure. But trying to unpack what exactly it is they want to do and why they want to do it as a way to get at some of the incentives that are compelling them to act, and then think about how we can adapt their interest and channel their interest in doing something with technology, maybe the fact they're able to tap some new funds to do that in education, into doing something that's actually really useful. Because rarely do we see ideas that lead with the tech having any real tangible value outside the tech sphere.
Thank you, Mike. Cecilia?
Yeah, also on the provocative question, I was wondering music. I'm singing a choir, and it doesn't matter where you are, and you speak different languages with people. When you start singing and you are having that sharing space, it doesn't matter. So maybe music can be added to that. Regarding your question, I think that it is really, really important. But I think what we have to learn from the past, because it doesn't matter what the trends are. Sometimes that doesn't mean that you have to follow the trends blindly. So if we learn from our experience in the past, I think that is the important component. And as Mike was saying, the usefulness of what the project that we are thinking about implementing is really important, besides the enthusiasm that we get when we want to do something different.
I concur with my two colleagues here on their 2 points, and just add that we, as we mentioned earlier, ensure that it is a completely community-engaged development and design with the Ministry of Education and the teachers, that they have a strong voice in what is being stated, and really spends this significant and sufficient time in prepping prepping the back end to what happens with the technology when it doesn't work. We have a number of projects right now that we spend a significant amount of time repairing the device, and that takes away from just time on with the education class.
We are at 4 o'clock. So I want to thank my colleagues who joined us on the panel, Mike, Cecilia, and Rebecca, and your participation as well. We are available afterwards. There is booths outside with information about the All Children Reading Grand Challenge, which Rebecca mentioned, and then this consortia activity called the Mobiles for Education Alliance. To Jessica's point, much of the function of the mEducation Alliance is to capture good practices across a variety of thematic areas in education. So maybe a round of applause for our panelists and yourselves.